Hey, what's up, guys? It is METAGAMESGX here, and we are going to be talking about the top 10 budget Yu-Gi-Oh decks for the May 2025 format going into June. So, of course, we just had the release of Alliance Insight, and this changed up the game. This provided a lot of new support for Mitsurugi and ryzeal, and you might be feeling boxed out of the meta right now because you're like, oh, I don't, really have the budget to spend on a Malice or a Mitsurugi deck, which is totally understandable. However, a lot of the newer staples, such as Fulos, has now gotten reprinted, and a lot of decks are still topping and doing very well, even without having those really expensive main deck, those really expensive meta decks. So I'm going to show you guys my top 10 list of the top 10 performing budget Yu-Gi-Oh decks. So my standard for this is decks under $150 that are top aiding regionals, of course, in the last month. But if I need to go back, I will also use just an aggregate of data from the last couple of months. And let's get right into it. Leave a like down below and comment when this video is over what your favorite deck that we went over was, and did I miss anything? So with that being said, if this video gets to 200 likes, we'll do a follow-up next month. Let's get right into it. So at number 10, we have a new contender for the list. If you are familiar, we have never featured Ice Barrier before, and this list recently got a top 9 or top 8 finish at the Ridgeland WCQ, and this is a pure Ice Barrier deck, which is pretty awesome to see. I'm sure you could also run this as a Sprite variant, but I think this shows that the pure Ice Barrier deck has a lot of chops to it for being a budget deck right under $150. So what this deck tries to do is establish an end board that is very interactive with your opponent, but at the end of the day ends up creating a board that locks your opponent out of things with General Ryo the Ice Barrier, just saying when an effect that resolves that was activated by effect monster, they basically your opponent has to discard a card to activate effect monster. So it's just like Murakamo, but like way better. You could also run other floodgates with this deck if you want, but also you just have really powerful synchro monsters in the form of Lancia, which can turbo out all the Trishulas, and then also just the other really great water synchros. So this deck has a lot going to it. Obviously, this list now doesn't have Totally Awesome or Bahamut Toad, but I don't think that necessarily puts this deck behind as much as you'd think, because whenever I play against this deck, they aren't quite making Toad. Toad's just kind of extra for this deck. So at the end of the day, if you're looking for a deck that's still pure and will allow you to play something differently, if you're a Mermal fan or if you're a Marincess fan, but you're looking for something different, I think this might be it for you. Next, we have Six Samurai, which recently just got a top 16 finish at the Ecuador Nationals. And Six Samurai is a storied deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Obviously, just tops across the last 2 decades essentially of this game. And it's a very good deck still, with the new support giving it a lot of just like room to actually do its thing in the meta right now. This build is running a ton of the old cards while also running the new Secret Six Samurai Kizaru. The new Secret Six Samurais just makes this deck way better now. It can actually play through some hand traps. It can actually make an end board. It can actually, if it wants to, just hand loop you for infinity. This is one of the decks that can actually like hand loop people for the most part, like through things like Molcharmi. You have very powerful link monsters, like you're running literally 3 Saryuja because you can make 3 Saryuja. You can special out enough bodies. This deck is the definition of cancer because you can do things like Trishula hand loop with Omega and just keep looping it. You can't make Dissipator, unfortunately, but between just like the ability to also make multiple negates on top of having, your hand traps, this deck just runs a small crossout package, which is super funny. This deck, if you go second against it and you don't see a hand trap or you don't hit them in the correct place, you are going to be cooked, and it's a very good deck for that reason. I can see why it got top 16. Next, we got a top 16 list recently. I know, guys, we featured Ritual Beast the last like 5 lists, I think, but this is a new list. This is from the El Salvador Nationals that happened just a few days ago, and this is a 40 card Ritual Beast list, and it's as standard as it can get, though. you're running the 3 Lara, you're running the Kanahawks, you're running the Protos, you're running a bunch of non-engine, but then also main decking the Steeds on top of having the Gaia as an access with a very good side deck for the meta. That is just what a lot of the time, a lot of these, metas come down to. You're adjusting your deck to just fit into the meta like this Duelist did, right? Like a lot of these decks, Konami, when they print new support for them, they're trying to give you guys, an ability to use your deck in the format that you want to play in. Konami likes it when there's lots of decks to play. So the fact this player just took the standard main deck and then just made a side deck that was perfect for the meta, addressing Malice with the Chaos Hunters and Phantasmes and Lancias, but then also having a lot of Mitsurugi matchup stuff between the Evenly, the Dark Rulers. So, and then also having some spicy going first options for when you need to side out Fulo. So I really do like this list, and Ritual Beast continues to be one of the best budget options at under $150. All right, so next on our list, we have a top 8 Leighton WCQ that happened very recently, and also Distant Coder got second at the Toronto Regional with Melodious. Melodious continues to be a deck that you can take into really any format. Ever since Herman Hansen really won his nationals with the new support, this deck continues to pop up here and there. We featured this deck, basically every other budget deck list, because this deck kind of skips formats, but then it comes back in randomly, and it still is a deck that gets to run Gamma, right? Like it gets to run non-once per turn Gamma in the form of Herald of the Orange Lights. Very good, right? It's probably the best hand trap in the game, right? So it already has that going for it. It has a ability to go second because it has in-engine board breaking in the form of Flowering Etoile, but also has just like its own branded fusion. So either going first and going second, you have lots of push within the engine, but even better, you get to run like 20 non-engine. Now, I think going into Dragon Tail Yummy format where non-engine isn't exactly as important, this deck might fall off a little bit for right now as we're going into the national season. For what is important, I think this deck will actually be a very good option for somebody who wants a deck around $100. Setting up multiple bounces on top of being able to have plenty of interaction points with IP Masquerade and SP Little Knight. There's a lot to be desired here. All right, so next on our list is Tenpai Dragon. Tenpai Dragon is still a deck that, no matter, since it's come out, it is still a deck that can very easily take a tournament. And now it's a deck that can reside very easily under $150. As this Duelist was able to top 8 as regional in April with a list that is using the Sky Striker engine in order to facilitate board breaking while playing around hand traps. Because if you use your Sky Striker cards before your Tenpai cards, your opponent is going to be forced to like hand trap the Sky Striker cards, which is a lot worse than, say, ashing or imperming the Pydra or whatever. So it is going to be one of those decks that has an incredible going second. You are going to be, when you hear your opponent go second and say, you can take first, they're probably on something like this. And I think that you can also take this deck and do quite well. I think that the deck has been hit quite a lot now, but it still has a lot of firepower while also being able to mix with other engines. If you have things like the Fiendsmith core lying around or other things like that, there's plenty of builds out here for you to find a Tenpai deck that you can chill with at a budget and do well. This is the best going second deck in the game, while also being able to set up a decent going first deck if you build around it, such as this Duelist did with the Heat Waves and the Koki Mirror Drago. So definitely plenty of options. All right, so for our next entry, we do have Blue Eyes. Now, this might take some by surprise, but of course it's still a incredible budget option. Like we have this list right here, which I just featured in a short, that is a $50 list that topped at the end of March, and this is just 3 structure decks, right? He just tossed in a couple cards like Seals, and he's off to the races. So this is what you can do as well if you want to be able to tango with the format. You can buy 3 structure decks. It comes with all the non-engine. This is what you can do in order to play Yu-Gi-Oh on a cheap level, on top of like Fulos is being cheap. There's no reason you can't play Yu-Gi-Oh for under $100 anymore. Now you also have Buster Blade or Blue Eyes, which is a little bit more of an expensive version because you just require a bit more engine pieces. But this, version makes a very good end board in the form of being able to, lock with the Buster Blader and the Whelp engine. So, it makes your already great end board even better. If you're looking for that kind of thing out your deck. Here, now we're getting to the bomb 5. We have Kashtira, because Kashtira keeps topping nationals and winning regionals, whether it's just, Regenesis Kashtira or just, Fiendsmith Kashtira or just Umi Kashtira. And this was a list that got top 32 at the Columbia Nationals this month. And this is a very interesting take on Kashtira. I'm just labeling, this slot as Kashtira. This is just a variant you can run because at the end of the day, if you're running, 3 Fenrir, a couple Unicorn, and the Birth and Theosis, you are basically running a Kashtira engine, and then you can build around that. And this duelist, made it so he's going to waterlock his opponents, essentially. So I bet, play this version if you don't have any Mermail duelists around you. But besides that, this deck is actually quite good. It does set up, an end board that is theoretically a lock, making it so your opponent can't do anything except for with water effects. So it's still very good on top of having the Kashtira cards. Just one of the best engines in the whole game, right? Like, I can't think of another deck that has their main deck boss monster ban that has done so much to, ban, like to devastate the meta. The only other deck is probably Tearlaments. Because Tearlaments has, I think, a couple YCSs post Kikolos being banned, but if you can consider Kikolos their boss monster, right? So Kashtira is still out here doing great, and this is just a great. And now, if you are familiar with the budget list, you are familiar with Fire King. It is also usually around the top of the Rogue tier list. This deck continues to do quite well. This is a list from early March, but we did see Dinkabui, recently take the French Open, I think, with it, with basically his same list. And this is a deck that ends up being around $100 flat and gives you the option to win a huge tournament. Like, it gives you a lot of non-engine space, has incredible engine going second. This is something I personally highly value in decks when looking at deck building, is the ability to board break within engine. This is why I think ryzeal was so good as it was, and why Fire King is as good as it is, because of things like Kieran. Kieran is a card that just says special summon from hand, pop a card, essentially, and start your engine. So having that ability is super underrated. I think X ryzeal showed that with ryzeal, and Kieran continues to show it here. So I think that this deck continues to be a menace in the rogue scene, and will still end up giving you, respecting your time, respecting your money, more importantly, and giving you a deck that can compete with the other big dogs in the room, right? You can run things like Ash Blossom, Valor, and Imperm, but you're also able to run a very unique low to the ground control-ish deck that can go off kind of at any time and swarm with big bodies, blow up the board with your Xyz. It is a pretty simple deck too at the end of the day, so it's not that hard to misplay, which is a good thing for across tournaments. So it is definitely a great deck to consider if you're looking for a budget option here in this format. And for number 2, we have a familiar face. We have Memento. I think Memento is a deck that is going to really give you one of the most bang for your buck. It is a deck that can run multiple different variants, whether it's pure or Fiendsmith, and be a very competent fusion strategy that also gets to link summon. It's very much like Branded in that sense. It has lots of ways to play through hand traps going first and going second, but then also has, just a lot of pop ability with the with the fusion engine. This build in particular that just top 8'd the Greek Open chose to run Super Poly, so you can run the Chaos Star Source for the Blue Eyes matchup. I feel like this might be a little bit different, but also like you can obviously just have a Malice target nowadays. And then also just running a board breaker engine in this deck in particular, which is interesting. And this deck has, it has a ton of bricks in it, which is interesting, but all the bricks get you there and they all work with each other. And it has a very good grind game for that reason too. This build is doing a build where you're not really even using Combined Creation as the ultra fuck you end board piece. You're using a lot of interaction with your extra deck and with your Memento Fusion and board breakers. So it's certainly one of those decks that will continue to be a deck that you'll probably go against once during a whole tournament run kind of thing. If you're expecting a rogue deck, this should be at the top of it. Just you have to know what these cards do. And it just won 2 YCSs in a row, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if this deck ended up continuing to be a powerhouse as it is now, you know, having the ability to go into Grand Chimera, like I mentioned, but then also just tons of interaction points and being able to deck build very, you know, a high variety is something I always, you know, highly value on top of the board breaking capability. So that's why this deck ends up at the number 2 spot on my budget list this month. And at number 1 on our list, we have Crystron. Crystron is that deck, in my opinion. It is a deck for around $100 that got buffed by the last ban list with, you know, things like Shifter and Dweller being banned. And this is a deck that does not lose to like Droll, does not lose to the Charmies. It is a deck that is able to play the long game. You know, it can go to turn 5, turn 7 very easily and have just a consistent grind game throughout the whole thing, but also set up a very mean end board with cards like Cyber Dragon Infinity, Invoked Mechaba. You know, the other decks can even run other end board pieces. This, you know, it has diverse deck building, which is, once again, something I value. But I think its ability to play through hand traps is almost unparalleled on this list. You have things like Tristeros, which just says, hey, I'm going to make an end board on your turn, right? And then also really just like the one huge choke point being drawn on inclusion just usually doesn't end up coming up. And, you know, this deck is able to run things like Forbidden Droplet and use it to high success because all your monsters have graveyard effects, right? So like you want to put your monsters in the graveyard. So being able to use Droplet in a format where Malice, you know, this Droplet's great against Malice and Mitsurugi. So, you know, definitely a plus for this deck. And just being able to, you know, have a, you know, it's a synchro deck, so you can run things like Gravity Collapse, but also it has a great going first and a decent going second. I wouldn't say it has the best going second on this list, but I think its going first is unparalleled on this list. And then also just its ability, it can run non-engine, and it is very highly consistent now. It can go second with its engine without Dweller now, so that's also why I think I'm rating it first on the list. I know I've been rating Crystron highly the last couple lists, guys. Hopefully we'll get some new ones, but I do like updating the list every month to give you guys updates on what's happening. This list was from, you know, April 5th, so fairly recent on this Crystron list, you know. So, you know, shout out to everybody, to all the Crystron duelists. If you're looking for a deck for around $100 that can do its thing in Tango with all the meta decks, you know, go against Malice, go against Mitsurugi, and have a decent time, I think this is the deck. So with that being said, what was your favorite deck on this list? Did I miss anything? Would you rate anything higher or lower? Let me know down below in the comments. Subscribe today, guys. We're on the road to 10,000 or 20,000 subscribers. Join today if you want to become a channel member and get a bunch of awesome perks. Use your Twitch Prime sub on my Twitch if you want to help support the channel. Join my Discord. Follow me on Twitter. You could always donate on the channel if you want to help support it as well. If you guys want to help support more great content. With that being said, METAGAMESGX signing out.